had in mind. And moving on off of that point, I'd like to ask Mr. Sullivan, I had the pleasure of attending that meeting that you and Ms. Shiva Hood did at the firehouse, and I'm going to ask the same question there of you that I asked. I'm going to ask you the same question here that I asked you there because I thought it was a candid answer, but it needed a bigger audience.
I'll try and respond the same way.
Yeah. Now you look at, I guess, slide 2. And here we are in, looking at FY15, and year after year, we're projecting negative multiple millions of dollars, culminating with 5 years out with negative almost $5 million. And when I asked you at the firehouse, I said, I'll rephrase it here because the graph's here. At what point on that graph do we enter receivership?
Yeah, that was the question. You don't necessarily enter receivership. The way the DOR would go about is first they would basically appoint a overseer, I think, and that individual starts working with the towns and such. And it's a sort of a 4-step, almost 4 possibilities, if you will. At some point when you get taken over in receivership, what happens is you can't set your tax rate. If you cannot set your tax rate, you have to borrow for the funds. And again, that's borrow. You're not getting free money from the state, you're borrowing, so you have to pay those back. And at some point, once that's no longer the option and there's more issues, that's when the state comes in. And bluntly, in a conversation we had with the Department of Revenue, they said no community has ever liked when the state has come in. So, the canned answer is, if you're asking me when that's going to happen, I really can't tell you on that.
Roughly 3-4 years at the status quo rate with no changes in revenue. The way we're looking at it right now, about 3 or 4 years.
If we can't set the tax rate, can't put the services in that you're supposed to have, such as police and such, can't do the education. If we go below minimum net school spending, which is where you'd probably be projected out there, that's when you hit it. You hit rock bottom, and that's when they'd be coming in. So, if you look at it and what our rising costs are and such, and you tell me in FY19 or even FY18, if you've made $4 million to almost $5 million worth of cuts, what sort of services are you going to have?
Mike, just as a piece for you, you're talking receivership. The bottom line is the town has to pass a balanced budget every year. So the issue, as far as that goes, when the town no longer can pay its bills, but if you have a balanced budget, we continue to pay our bills. So as Derek said, when you hit these other thresholds, then like most of the time when this happens, like Lawrence and some of the other places, it's usually the school department can't meet the minimum standards the state hits, and then they come in on that. As I think New Bedford was threatened with issues, I'm not sure what they are. But Wareham, as far as financial goes, they can pay their bills, and they're not in a bankruptcy situation per se. So receivership is not something that's, you hit a certain number and it happens. The fact is just not there, because every year you're going to have a balanced budget.
Well, I mean, can you project at what point we won't be able to pay our bills?
No, because every year you're going to cut more and more.
All right, gotcha.
So it's going to be a service-based decision. It's not going to be a dollar-based decision.
All right. And just one more question, please. What does this translate to if we do go this route for the median householding figure?
Mike, while Derek's digging that up, I just wanted to add one more to the receivership piece. Understand that this is not purely an economic decision by the Department of Revenue. It's also a highly political decision by the state legislature, because they're the ones who have to approve the financial plan to bail you out. In the case of Lawrence, it was in the form of a management board and $24 million loan. As Mr. Sullivan said, a loan. So it's really big boy kicking the can down the road, I guess is what you could call it. Because they're going to have to pay that back, or they're going to be back before the legislature begging for another loan because they can't pay off the first loan. And You know, the other piece is, when we talk about the political control, when you go to the legislature and you get in this sort of a situation, they appoint a management board for your town. The management board typically contains 7 people. You might get 2 people from Wareham on that management board. You're going to get a bunch of state functionaries and the rest of the board. And the chairman of that board is typically going to be the head of local services of the Department of Revenue. They are going to set your tax rate. They are going to take a look at what you're doing and say, you're not funding the schools enough. We're jacking the tax rate up $2 1,000. You need more cops. There's another 50 cents 1,000. They will hit you up for the money. It's not as though they come in here and operate with the peanuts that you had that got you into trouble in the first place. They come in and they radically alter your town government. They do it for a number of years until they think that you're stable, and they get out. The other thing is, they don't want to do this. It's a ton of work for them. You can imagine that you're running a major department in the Department of Revenue. Now you got to go run a town, because that's what it boils down to, or a city. They loathe to do this. So you have to have a lot of political clout to even get in that bad club, which we don't really have. You don't want to get in that club because the club runs you, and you don't save any money because they just take it from you anyway. So receivership is not a great idea.
Not that I was suggesting it was.
No, and let me just say that, and I don't think the town meeting voters also appreciate a scare tactic, and I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but when we talk about do this or receivership, I do kind of feel like that's a scare tactic. I agree with all my colleagues that it takes a long time to get there, and that the important thing to talk about is exactly the town having faith in the leaders of this town, that they are being fiscally responsible while also bringing more revenue into the town. And that's what we need to keep talking about. If this conversation continues to be receivership, then again, that's what it's going to be about. It's going to be that discussion. And again, I know that I wouldn't appreciate that, you know, a scare tactic of do this or you're going to go into receivership.
It wasn't meant as a, it was just a question. I wasn't meant.
No,
Yeah.
but all
It's a
the
good question
discussion
because
after that.
it's a good question because it's going to come up. Mike's not going to be the only one who asked that question.
Sure.
And I think hopefully people listening heard what the answer is. It's hard as hell to get to. It's hell to go through, and you don't save any money. So hopefully that puts that conversation to bed entirely. You had another question, Mike, as well?